Okay, I don't think anyone else is going to join, so we'll go ahead and get started. I'm going to share my screen. Can you see my screen right now? You just put it in the chat. Yeah. Okay, great. So we're going to start, like the whole idea, I guess, around this is first, we have to figure out, there's two parts to an Alexa skill. Or, well, first I'll talk about myself. And so my name is Kathryn. I work at NBC Universal in the research and development group. So recently have been getting a lot of experience with conversational agents and that sort of thing. And so I thought I'd do just like a simple how to create your own Alexa skill now. And so basically there's two parts to an Alexa skill. First, you have kind of the interface. And so I'll go into Sublime here and just write up some notes. But you have kind of your voice interface. And so that's kind of what you say. And there's two parts to your voice interface. You're going to have utterances and you're going to have intents. And so with this, utterances are like what you say. So please mute your line once you join. Thanks. So yeah, utterances are what you say. And so say you want to hear, say you're talking to Alexa and you want to know what the weather is. And so there's a couple ways you could say that. You could say, what's the weather, or how is the weather outside? And these are all utterances. They're things that you say, but they have the same meaning. And so here you could say weather, description, intent, weather, description, intent. And then you might have, another type of utterance that's like, is it raining? And so this might be like the raining intent. It would have a different meaning than, what is the weather in general? This is like a question of, is it raining? It's going to give you a yes or no answer. Or it might give you a percentage of, what the chances of it raining. So you can have multiple utterances that map to the same intent, or you can just have one utterance that maps to one intent. But usually you'll have multiple ways of saying you'll have multiple ways of saying something, and it has, the same meaning. So that's kind of one side, and this is the side we're going to be focusing mainly on today. I know some of the posts I have up, they go kind of in detail about this, but I'm going to show a couple other kind of tips and tricks of how you can use this with API.ai and some other tools that make it a lot easier. As well as like how to debug your skill and that sort of thing. So once you have your voice interface, the next step is, so you already have the utterances, you have the intents, the next step is the response. And so that now that Alexa says, this is what the utterance was, it was how's the weather outside? We've mapped it to the right intent, so Alexa knows the meaning of what you're saying. Now Alexa has to come up with a response. And so if we kind of think of it like this, our utterances and intents, they're kind of like our front end development, if you will. It's kind of the design of like, what are you going to say? What does it map to? It's considered part of the front end, you could call it, of our development. And then creating the response, you might be hitting several APIs, you might be hitting a database. That's going to be kind of our back-end development. And these are actually going to have the code is going to be in separate places. And so for this first part, we're mainly going to be focusing on the front end, and then we'll do another one where we'll focus on kind of the back-end development. And that's more of the part 2 and part 3 of the tutorials that I've written out. Does anyone have any questions? Feel free to just put them in the chat, and I'll look back to it throughout this live session. So I guess not yet, but cool. So this must make sense. So how do you even do this front-end development? How do you create these utterances and these intents? Well, you could do them through Alexa. Alexa has like an Alexa developer side to it. So if you just Google Alexa developer, this is where you're going to be coding the front end. So you'll sign in, you'll kind of do all of this stuff. Or my account, okay. I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a second. And see if I can remember my password. Oh my gosh, okay. Okay, well, we won't do that side for now. Oh, there's a mute all. How do I do that? You click on participants. Okay, sorry about that. So yeah, I'll share my screen again. So we'll start with the API.ai stuff, but basically you can go into the Alexa developer. I actually have screenshots of it here. But basically, like, you go in and you can fill out all this information about your skill, and you can follow along with this. But the purpose of doing this like live session is basically so that, you know, you can go back and like do these tutorials and kind of read the posts, but now you'll have like an extra set of knowledge so that when you do them, you'll know kind of the fuller scope and that sort of thing. So if we scroll down here, like, this is usually where you'd put, you know, your intent schema. So this is going to list all of your intents. So here, when we have like the weather description intent, the raining intent, and that sort of thing, this is where they would be listed. And then you'll also have your utterances, which are here. So here it's saying, like, tell me about a zodiac sign. You know, I want to know more about something, and it's mapped to the specific intent. So we're going to go ahead and try to create this skill in API.ai, or at least create the voice interface of it. And you might be wondering, why would you want to use API.ai? Well, there's lots of reasons. And so we're just going to go ahead and create an agent. And yeah, API.ai, it's going to help us create the voice interface for our skill, and it's going to make it a lot easier. So we're just going to call this Zodiac skill. And our agent is just like our skill, or our conversational agent, if you will. But if we just create this here, let's see, no questions. This will save. So yeah, so here now you've created, you know, an agent in API.ai, and this is like your voice interface kind of template. And then at the end, you'll be able to basically create it in here, download it, and then upload it to your Alexa skill. And it's much easier to do it that way because it's much more visual. It's not just a JSON object you're looking at. You can actually interact with it and see if it works with this little window. So if we go ahead and create an intent, and here we called it get zodiac fact intent. And so we'll call that as the intent name. And then we'll say, tell me about zodiac. I want to know more about zodiac. So this zodiac thing is kind of like a variable, so it could be any zodiac sign. And so we'll create an entity for that later. But we'll save this now. And so for zodiac here, basically it's a variable, and so in order to create a variable, we have to create this entity. And so inside of here, we'll call it zodiac, we'll save it, and we'll put in one value, and we have our list of values up here, which is really nice. So we'll go ahead and copy and paste each of these. We'll only do a couple, just so we kind of get the hang of it, but you could have, you know, all of these in there and just paste them in. And these are all examples of zodiac signs. And so this whole skill is basically saying, like, tell me, if you wanted to know more about a specific zodiac sign, this is what you would do. So there's a couple. And we'll add Leos and Gemini, just so we can have a couple different ways to say the same thing. So now if I go back into my intent, I'll be able to say, what was I going to say for these? Yeah, tell me more about this. And you would say whatever sign you want it to be. So here we would say, tell me about Leos. And then you would go in and you could say, tell me about a Leo. And just using all the different examples here of how you could say something. I want to know more about Gemini. And then sometimes it won't catch it, so then you can just highlight it and make sure that that variable name is then matched to the value you want it to be matched to. So we have a couple in there, so we'll go ahead and save them up. And so you might be wondering, like, that was really complicated, like why, everything was great in the tutorial, here, I could have just copied and pasted it into this, as my slot type. But the problem with that is it's only on Amazon's or Alexa's side of it. Like, you can't really, take that and put it in your Google Home. You can't take that and put it in your HomePod or whatever it is. But with here, you can use integrations. And you can literally select whichever platform you want it to be on. So if you want a Slack bot, done. If you want a Twilio thing, done. If you want a Twitter bot, done. So the idea that you only have to create one voice interface and it's on all of these platforms now, that's what makes API.ai really great. And so you make your voice interface once and you don't have to create it a bunch of times in a bunch of different formats for different platforms. And so you might be wondering, okay, how do I get this on my Amazon Alexa? Well, here you have this. And right now there isn't a just one-click thing. You actually have to download a file and then just kind of copy and paste the right things into the Alexa side of it. So if I go into settings here, I can basically export this agent for Alexa. So if we take that, we'll go ahead and open the zip file here. And so it downloaded, I have this. And so here we go, and here we have a bunch of files. And it's gonna look pretty similar to what we saw before. So the main things in our voice interface, if we remember, are utterances and intents. And within those utterances, I should have said we're gonna have like custom slots. And these are for variables that may have different values. And so, for example, like instead of this being the raining intent, you could have it be, the weather type intent or something. So you could say, is it raining? And this could be a slot for like a weather type. And you could say, is it windy or whatever it is? And then, you would have the slot type, which would be weather type or something like that. And weather type could have the value of rainy, raining, windy, etc. And then when you go back in your backend, you can be like, okay, let's check out the value of that slot, and based on its value, return the appropriate thing or send that off to an API and return the appropriate thing. So yeah, now that we have this downloaded, we can take a look at what it is. Basically, it did that mapping for us. And so I want to know more about the zodiac, whatever it is. It's kind of already there, and it's in the same format as, this one was. Same format. And so usually you won't automatically come up with this format initially. Usually you'll kind of do something like I did here, which is I'm going to list out kind of all of my utterances and then figure out what intents they go with and what meanings they have. So then I can map out this voice interface, you know, just kind of brainstorming it and then put it into API.ai and then export it to whatever, you know, bot that I want it to be. And there's a bunch of options in API.ai. Are there any questions so far? That's pretty much how you do the voice interface. I'm going to see if I can get into my Alexa account here. But feel free, does anyone have any questions? You can just put them in the chat while I get into this Alexa account. And you can unmute yourself if you want. Sorry, it's making me create like a whole new account. It's very frustrating because I can't remember the password of this other account. All right, here we go. Okay, so now we are on the developer.amazon.com kind of universe. And so this is where you're going to be able to create or really put in your Amazon Alexa code for your voice interface. So if you click on Alexa here on this top tab, you're going to be able to go ahead and click Get Started. And then you're going to be able to click Add a New Skill. And then basically you'll enter all the information that is necessary for your skill. So kind of all of the logistical information, if you will. So we'll call this Zodiac skill, and we'll call it, we'll start Zodiac. We'll save that. Go to the interaction model, and this is where API.ai comes really, you know, in handy. Because when you're looking at a tutorial, it's very easy to just go ahead and copy and paste this. But when you have to write it out yourself, it can be really annoying, especially with JSON objects, which, you know, syntax-wise are kind of annoying to like get perfect. And so we can go to our, you know, our Zodiac skill thing here. Yeah. We can go ahead and copy that, put it into our utterances. We can go ahead and open the intent schema, copy that, put it into the intent schema, and we're done. And then we're not done. We have the Zodiac slot. And so we'll pull that into Sublime. And so the type is going to be Zodiac, and then we'll just paste all of those values. And we'll hit save. And we'll call this Zodiac, maybe. Unknown slot type for slot. Zodiac. Oh, so it's getting mad because it wants me to create my slots before I do that. So click save. That should have worked. Oh, because I changed this to be a lowercase. So we'll go ahead, save that. We'll update and then save. Hallelujah. Okay. So yeah, so that made it really easy. And now, especially because API.ai is owned by Google, you can literally click this and you're basically ready to go. And you have to do some stuff on Google, but that's a whole other story. But yeah, so now you have an interaction model, but you don't have any actual code responding to these things. All you have is, you have, I'm going to say something, this is what I said, this is the intent of what I said, but you don't have a response yet. Are there any other questions before? I guess we do have time to move on to kind of the function of it. I know I'm going super, super fast. So, and I'm not sure if there's a delay. Kind of. So the next part is a little trickier than kind of the first part. The first part's kind of figuring out what your skill is going to do. And then now, all right, well, I guess we'll keep going, keep pushing here. But yeah, so basically you'd keep going next here. And the next part, like once you have the interaction model, your voice interface, all of that done, you are going to go ahead and, select an endpoint. And that endpoint is going to hold your backend code, if you will, that will, connect your APIs if you need to call them to get information for the response. It'll have all the code that's forming that response, which is just going to be a JSON object. And so pretty much everyone that creates Alexa skills uses the Lambda. And so AWS, Amazon Web Services, that's another site. Web Services, and I'm going to stop sharing so I can log into this super quickly. Sign into console. Let's see if I can get into this easily. Cool. So I'll go ahead and share again. So back on sharing, so you should get something similar to this when you open Amazon Web Services, and you'll just go to Services and hit Lambda, because this is where your backend code is going to live. So we just did the front end, and now we're going to do the back end. And so we'll hit Create Lambda Function, the blank blueprint, and then Alexa Skills Kit, and then hit Next. And so this is just creating. So a Lambda function is basically serverless code, so it doesn't have, it's not using any resources when nothing is calling it. So if no one is using my Alexa skill, no resources are being used, if that makes sense. Versus like in the past, like a lot of times if you are not sure how many people are going to be using your code, like it could be a lot of people or, not so many people, you have to have these huge like server farms worth of stuff. But with Lambda, it kind of just uses resources and then charges you for those resources depending on how much you end up using. And so it's like serverless code, if you will, because you don't have to really deal with that side of things of, how much, stuff you need. So, your skill doesn't go down. Amazon handles that, which is really nice. And so we're just going to call this Zodiac. And we'll just keep this like that for now. In fact, we'll copy it and we're going to move it to a file that we're just going to call index.js. And we're going to just put it on the desktop here. And inside of this, yeah, we're going to keep that the same. In the role, we'll just create a new role or an existing role. The Lambda basic execution works great. We'll hit next. We'll hit create function. I'm doing this in Node.js. You could use the other languages, but based on Stack Overflow, I'm kind of, researching while I'm trying to create some stuff. I've found that Node is the most popular language to create these skills in. And it's also possible to have your Lambda code, like you have one instance of your Lambda code and you have one instance of your API.ai. It is possible to make it so that API.ai And like API.ai serves as kind of your one-stop shop for voice interface. Lambda can serve as your one-stop shop for an endpoint. For the most part, there's a lot of shareable code that kind of goes in between Google Actions and Slack and Facebook Messenger. You can just send out one super large JSON object, and it has, the specific things for each platform. And then depending on which platform is calling that code, it will display it. So that way you don't have to rewrite a bunch of different fulfillments. That's what the Lambda side is called, actually. It's called a fulfillment. You don't have to do all of these different fulfillments for each platform that your thing is on. You can just have one set of code. And that's what API.ai and Lambda make possible. And so that's really nice because it is like a simple endpoint. For Alexa, you just have to, copy this value here. And I'm going to delete all of this once this is over, so you can't hack me. But you would basically just take this, go back here, and paste it in there, and that's connecting your front end with your back end. But basically you could create an API that hooks up to this and then use it on API.ai for the fulfillments. And so if I said it was enabled, you basically put your webhook here, which you could create with, I think it's API.ai gateway. But yeah, you would create that there. And I know there's a tutorial, a really popular tutorial online about that as well. But going back to Lambda, so you just created your first, I guess, call. The next thing to do would be to go ahead and, so the first part, if you kind of go through these tutorials, the part one was, basically doing the front end. Part two was setting up this. So now you just finished part one and part two of the tutorial, if you're still following. Okay, making sure there's no questions. And so now you're on part three, which is the most lengthy part of the tutorial. So I'm just going to copy a lot of this code and explain it. But basically, this is all going to go in your index.js. And the reason I'm putting it here versus Lambda is because, or versus in this code editor, is because if I refresh this, all of my code goes away. And I don't know, I like editing my code locally versus on this, editor. So I can just upload a zip file. So basically edit all my code here, upload it here. I don't know, it's a better process for me, but it depends on, the way you want to work. But basically, when that file is uploaded here, what happens in the world of Alexa is you say, Alexa, tell me about Leos. Alexa goes ahead and says, oh, tell me about Leos. That maps to the get zodiac, fact intent. It maps to that intent. Oh, we also have a slot in there where zodiac maps to Leo. And so now that you kind of have all that information, we say, okay, now we're going to call our Lambda function, and we're going to call the exports.handler of that Lambda function. So this is automatically called when we do our Alexa skill because we hooked up our front end to the back end with this endpoint here. And this is only for Alexa. Right now, API.ai is not connected to any of this because remember, we just exported our front end to that. So once you have your index.js, export.handler, that is run automatically. Basically, we see what type of request it is. So if I actually go back here to the test, so if we just say next, if I just say hi here, let's see what happens. Okay, so this is Lambda's request to us, and this just means, there's no code in our thing and it errors, but and that's because we haven't done anything yet. But basically in here, if you go in, it says, this is the application ID, this is the type of request. So inside of our code, notice it's this big object. It has session, it has request as a version. And so inside of here, we go event, which is this whole JSON object. We go event.session.new, event.session, or event.request.type, event.request.type, all of those things. So if I was actually to do start Zodiac skill. I go ahead. What was my, oh, Zodiac. So if I just said start Zodiac, because that's the invocation name, I go ahead and for the request type, I get launch request. And so here, when I go if event.request.type equals launch request, then this is the code that's going to be run because that's what happened. When I typed in hi here, it went in, it had an intent request, and it didn't really know it was what it's doing because we haven't added that many intents. And so it just automatically mapped it to that. So so in here, so that means like here when we have request.type, it's intent request, so it's going to go ahead and do this. And then for session ended, that means when I say, you know, Alexa stop, or, you know, I'm done with the session, or I don't respond, you know, this is what is run. And so looking at all of this, basically we have some functions to implement. And so on launch, that's not implemented yet. On intent and on session ended, these are not implemented. And so if we go back to this, we can go ahead and copy all of these and put these in. And now we have on session started, on launch, on intent, on session ended, and they're implemented. I mean, they're written, but they're not, you know, implemented. And so, yeah, just putting the code into these, that's the next step. And so I'm just kind of looking at the time. We're doing good on time. And so, yeah, the next step would be to implement these functions. But in creating these responses for Alexa, we have to create these pretty, you know, beefy JSON objects. And so I have a couple helper functions in the tutorial that basically, you know, you give it the, let's see, like you give it, you know, say you want to just give it, you know, some output. You want Alexa to say something, and if you don't say something, you want her to reprompt you. So if, you know, you say, you know, Alexa, tell me about all of the zodiac signs. And Alexa's like, here are all the zodiac signs, Leo, Gemini, whatever it is. And then Alexa's like, you know, do you want to hear about one of them? You know, and you don't respond to that, like this is what she would, you know, say. But yeah, basically this is the format that Alexa is looking for. And so here we just have like a simple function you can call to get that format where you just put in what you want Alexa to say, the reprompt text, and if, you know, we're done talking, like the conversation has ended or not. And this is like if you want a card. Yeah, this is if you want like a card to go with your response. And so when you have, you know, the Amazon Echo, you can download an app, and for each thing you tell Alexa, a lot of times you'll get a card associated with Alexa's response. And those, you know, responses are eventually going to show up on the Echo Show, each of those cards. So that's becoming a little more important, I guess, in the bot world. But yeah, so that this would be how you would do that. You would just have the card object here. But yeah, these are really annoying to have in every single, you know, intent response or handler, each intent handler, if you will. So it's nice to have some helper functions. And these are just some easy ones that you can use. And then here I start kind of going through and implementing each of the functions. And so on launch, this is what we want to happen. So we want Alexa to say, welcome to Zodiac Facts. This is what I can do. If they don't, you know, say anything back, you say, you know, what signs are you interested in, blah, blah, blah. And then the header for the card is going to be Zodiac Facts. And then we set up some session attributes, and then we go ahead and call the callback function, which basically says, hey, this is what I want to return to Alexa. This is what I want Alexa to respond with. You just grab that callback and do, you know, session attributes and build that response with the helper function. Because you know, basically, that's all this is you figure out what you want to say, you figure out what you want the reprompt to be. If there's a reprompt, you figure out what you want the card to say, and then you send it all back to Alexa. Now, sometimes you might be calling an API, and that's, where you're going to need to use the request module. And I do have a YouTube video on that I'll put in the chat after this. But yeah, so if you wanted to request, like I think the example I use in the video is from the New York Times API. And so you could request, what the top articles are, or maybe it's like Wikipedia. It's like what, given, a Wikipedia article, how many hits does it have? Something like that. I don't know. I did it a while back. But yeah, like how would you, implement an API request or a HTTP GET request in this, or a POST request? That can definitely be something that you do here. But for now, we'll keep it easy and just kind of hard code everything. But yeah, so this is kind of the template of how you're going to do everything inside of this backend, if you will. And so going down, we'll go ahead and copy the rest of this. And so here we're actually just grabbing, this large if statement that's basically like, if it's this intent, do this. And we're going to have to lowercase these because of the way it was copied over. But yeah, like, if it's this intent, do this. If it's this intent, do this. If it's this intent, do this. That sort of thing. And then they each have their own handler. And so we'll grab this object 2. So when, the user says, hey, I want to know about, Pisces. Well, we have a fact that goes with that. And so instead of hitting an API, here we just have this really large object that's going to have our fact for us. And then here we'll grab these, which is just, handling the fact request. And so we'll grab that first and kind of talk through that a little bit. And so here for this first line, we're grabbing the sign. And so we go ahead, look at all the slots, look at the zodiac slot, get its value, and then put it in lowercase. And then we're going to go ahead and match the sign with the appropriate sign. So they might have said, here they might have said Leos, or they might have said, Virgos, but we really only need the one thing. And so just matching it with the right thing. And then if that zodiac sign doesn't exist, we set the speech output and reprompt text accordingly, saying, hey, find another sign that doesn't exist. Or if it does exist, then we go ahead, grab that fact, have the speech output be that fact, and then add the reprompt text and give the card a header. And then we go ahead and create the appropriate response based on, if that zodiac sign did in fact exist in our set of zodiac signs up here. And then we also have this capitalized first function that just makes it so that our header has a capital letter when we use it for the card inside of the Alexa app. And then we also have a get help request. So if you're asking Alexa, how do I use this skill, or I'm confused or something like that, this is what would be called. And this is automatically built into Amazon. So you don't have to say, Alexa stop, you don't have to program any of that. That's automatically built in, which is really nice. But if you ever wanted to add on more information or add different information to those responses or what happens in those requests, you're able to do that, which is also nice. So here we basically say, if we get the help request, and that would be, if we, what would happen is we start at the top here, kind of go through it again. Export.handler is called. We go ahead, we would see it's an intent request. We'd go ahead, look at on intent. We'd go into on intent. We'd see it's an Amazon.help intent. So we'd go ahead and look at the help request. And then here, handle help requests, and then we would explain the skill again here. And then, set all of the different things and then, create that response per usual. Going back here, we'll go ahead, add this. which is just handle finish session request. And this is just saying, you know, simple response, goodbye, thank you for using it. And then we say true for the ending session because we do want to end the session, whereas before we did not. So that was a lot of code. Basically, everything starts with the exports.handler, and a lot of these are just handling different types of requests and intents. And so you can either start the skill, be in the skill, or ending the skill. For the intent request, you go ahead and you basically do this big switch or if statement, you know, handling each request, and then depending on it, you're basically forming this speech output, reprompt, and header, depending on, you know, what you want to do, and then building it with one of the helper functions, which will help build your JSON object, so you don't have to, you know, create this big JSON object in each of your handlers. Are there any questions? I don't think so. Okay. So we'll go ahead and upload this to, we still have time, okay. We'll go ahead and zip this up and upload it to AWS. So you just do, yeah, the compressed thing I just did, and then upload that zip file, save and test. And you're gonna wanna test it with the Alexa start session, input test event, you save and test. And my Echo is talking. Alexa, stop. I should have muted it. But yeah, so here we go. It's, you know, succeeded. This just really this just means we don't have any syntax errors. That's the main way I use this test for. But if we went here, and if I say, tell me about Leo's, we ask the skill, or tell me about a Leo. We'll refresh. It needs to be refreshed a little bit. We'll say, or what did we have in our intro? Because we didn't do a whole lot of, yeah, tell me about, and then Leo. Let's try, tell me about Leo. Okay, so this means we have an error somewhere. So we'll go ahead and click to view the watch group, and this is basically where all of your error messages are going to be, all your console.log messages are going to be, they're going to be in this thing. And so, cannot read value, property value of undefined. I know what this is. So we named our Zodiac thing with like all capital letters. So when we do here, this needs to be also, you know, all capital letters as well. And then do we use it? So let's see if that fixes it. And then we'll go ahead and go back here. We'll go ahead and upload from zip file. And go down. And seems to be looking good. And so we'll go ahead and do that again. Still have an error. So we'll go back here, click this, check it out. Still having that error, not 100% sure why. So we'd have to do some debugging. If we go back here, value, slots.zodiac. Did we use all uppercase for that? Zodiac, oh, we called it Zodiac slot. So we might have to call it that here. So that's the name of it. So if we save that, make sure that was saved. go ahead and make sure compress this. We'll go ahead and upload here. And we'll save and test. And then, no, just closed that. Okay. Go back to test. Tell me about Leo. There we go. So here on the right side, so here we have our request, intent request, you get Zodiac fact intent. And here we have the output speech. And so this is what Alexa would say. Leo is the 5th sign in the Zodiac, blah, 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 blah. And then we'd have a card with this content, which is just, you know, Leo, blah, blah, blah. Title would be Leo with a capital L. And then the reprompt would be, do you want to hear more about Zodiac signs? And so
Leo is the 5th sign in the Zodiac. Leos have high self-esteem.
So you can go ahead and listen to it there. So there you go. You know, now we have an Alexa skill. I know that was a super fast introduction. We only have a couple minutes left, or we have a little bit left. So if there's any questions, yeah, feel free to unmute yourself and ask it, or, you know, put it in the chat if you want to do that as well. But yep, that seems to be it. The main things to remember are, 1, create your intent schema in API.ai, because you can learn how to do all of these other integrations as well. And making sure when you are kind of testing your skill, it's key to use the click here to view CloudWatch log group, because you know, this side is not going to give you any error messages. So if I go, I think this will give me an error over here. Yeah, like the remote, like this is unhelpful. And so making sure to go over here, click this, and this will give you kind of all the logs from all of the calls of your Alexa skill that are on this test window. So I think that's it. I'm going to stop the session if there aren't any questions. But yeah, thank you for joining. Thank you for coming and listening. I hope you learned something.